The night sky erupted in a violent burst of electric blue and searing white. Princess Yuna gripped the control panel of her diplomatic shuttle, her slender fingers trembling as alarms screamed through the compact bridge. Outside the reinforced windows, space twisted and churned like an angry ocean, ion storms lashing against the ship's protective shields. "Emergency protocol initiated," droned the ship's computer in a flat, emotionless voice. "Hull integrity compromised. Navigation systems failing." Yuna watched in horror as her carefully plotted course dissolved into chaos. This mission was supposed to be simple, a routine diplomatic transfer between distant star systems. Now, everything was falling apart. The ship bucked and twisted, throwing her against the safety harness. Sparks erupted from control panels, filling the air with the acrid smell of burned electronics. Her people, the Celestials, prided themselves on technological superiority. Their ships were supposed to be unbreakable, their navigation systems perfect. Yet here she was, a royal princess, about to become nothing more than space debris. With a final, tremendous crash, the ship broke through something. Atmosphere, Yuna realized. Trees whipped past the windows in a blur of green and brown. The ground was coming up fast. Too fast. "Brace for impact," the computer announced, its calm voice a stark contrast to the terror flooding Yuna's mind. The shuttle hit the ground with a sound like the world splitting apart. Metal screeched. Branches snapped. For several moments, everything was darkness and pain. When Yuna finally opened her eyes, she realized the ship had crashed into a dense forest. Moonlight filtered through a massive crack in the hull, casting strange shadows across broken control panels and scattered equipment. She moved slowly, checking herself for injuries. A deep cut ran along her left arm, and her right ankle throbbed with a pain that suggested a serious sprain. Her communication device was crushed, the delicate crystal screen shattered beyond repair. The emergency beacon flickered weakly, its signal probably too weak to reach anyone. Outside, the forest was alive with night sounds. Insects chirped. Something moved in the distant underbrush. Yuna realized with a cold feeling of dread that she was completely alone on an unknown planet. Her training kicked in. First, assess the situation. The shuttle was badly damaged. Most of the advanced technology was destroyed or malfunctioning. Her survival kit was intact, a small blessing. She pulled out a medical patch and pressed it against her bleeding arm, watching as the advanced healing material sealed the wound. A distant sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Not the light, quick movements of a small animal, but something heavier. Something walking with purpose. Yuna had two options. She could try to hide inside the damaged shuttle, hoping whatever was approaching wouldn't notice her. Or she could prepare to defend herself with the small defensive weapon she kept in her emergency kit. Just then, a beam of light cut through the forest darkness. A human figure emerged, moving carefully between the trees. He carried a long object, some kind of walking stick, and a bright flashlight that swept across the crash site. Princess Yuna of the Celestial Realm held her breath. First contact was about to happen, and nothing in her years of diplomatic training could have prepared her for this moment. The human was getting closer. Each step brought him nearer to the crashed shuttle. Nearer to her. David Miller moved slowly through the forest. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching glimpses of broken branches and scattered metal. Something had crashed here, and as a park ranger, he knew unusual things could happen in these woods. The beam of light caught a glint of strange metal. This was no ordinary plane crash. The wreckage looked like it came from somewhere else entirely. David had seen his share of strange things in the wilderness, but this was different. The metal seemed to shimmer with a strange light, almost like it was alive. He heard a sound. Not an animal sound. Something more like a soft movement. Someone was inside the crashed ship. Yuna pressed herself against the broken wall of the shuttle. Her hand gripped the small defensive weapon from her emergency kit. She knew the weapon could create a powerful energy burst, enough to stop most threats. But something about the approaching figure made her hesitate. The human moved differently from any species she had encountered before. He was careful, watchful, not charging in like a conqueror, but moving with a strange mix of caution and purpose. David saw the crack in the shuttle's hull. Someone was definitely inside. He called out, his voice calm and steady. "Hello, is anyone hurt in there?" Yuna understood the words through her universal translator, now crackling with static. She said nothing. Her training told her to remain hidden, to assess the threat. But the human did something unexpected. He set down his flashlight and pulled a small first aid kit from his backpack. "I'm a park ranger," he said. "If someone's injured, I can help." The universal translator caught his words. Help. Yuna had never heard a potential threat offer help before. In her world, unknown encounters meant defense, not assistance. David took another step forward. The moonlight caught his face, lines of concern, eyes that looked more curious than afraid. He was tall, wearing a dark green ranger uniform that blended with the forest around him. Yuna's ankle throbbed. The medical patch was wearing off, and she could feel blood seeping through her torn clothing. She was injured, trapped, and this human seemed to be her only option. Slowly, she moved. The metal of the shuttle creaked. David froze, but didn't run. His hand moved slightly, not to a weapon, but to the first aid kit. "I'm coming out," Yuna said finally, her voice rough from the crash. David saw her then. She was like no one he had ever seen before. Her skin had a slight silver sheen, her eyes larger and more angular than any human's. A cut ran along her arm, and she was limping. "You're hurt," David said simply. It wasn't a question. Yuna studied him. No fear, no immediate aggression, just a simple statement of fact. "My shuttle crashed," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "I need help." David nodded and took a step forward. "Let me look at that cut," he said, opening the first aid kit. For a moment, Princess and Park Ranger just looked at each other. Two beings from completely different worlds, brought together by chance in a dark forest. Yuna had a choice to make. Trust this human, or fight. The forest held its breath, waiting. The first light of dawn broke through the trees. David had set up a small camp near the crashed shuttle. A fire crackled softly, sending warm light across the forest floor. Yuna sat wrapped in a thick blanket David had found in his ranger backpack, her alien features looking strange in the firelight. "You're not going to ask where I came from," Yuna finally said, breaking the silence. David looked up from where he was preparing something in a small cooking pot. "People have their reasons for being where they are," he replied simply. "Right now, you need help. That's what matters." Yuna found this response puzzling. In her world, every encounter was a complex dance of protocol, rank, and carefully measured words. This human seemed to operate on a completely different level. He offered her a cup of something hot. "It's coffee," David explained. "Helps warm you up." The drink was bitter and strange. Yuna sipped it carefully, watching David move around the small campsite. He worked with a quiet efficiency that caught her attention. He was preparing for something, but she wasn't sure what. "We should think about your injuries," David said. He pulled out a more complete first aid kit from his backpack. Unlike the advanced medical patch Yuna had used, these were simple tools: bandages, antiseptic cream, gauze. Yuna held out her arm, letting David clean the cut. His touch was gentle but precise. She noticed how he checked each movement, how carefully he worked to avoid causing her more pain. A sudden sound broke the quiet. A loud, sharp cry echoed through the forest. David's body went instantly alert. "Mountain lion," he said quietly. "Stay very still." Yuna had faced countless threats in her diplomatic career, but something in David's tone told her this was different. This was survival. The sound came again, closer this time. David stood slowly. He picked up a long walking stick, the same one he had carried when he first found the shuttle. His movements were calm, controlled. "Don't move," he whispered to Yuna. The mountain lion appeared at the edge of the campsite. It was massive, powerful. Its eyes locked onto David, muscles tense and ready to spring. What happened next would stay with Yuna forever. David didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run. Instead, he stood tall. He made himself look big. His voice came out deep and loud. "Hey," he shouted, "back off." The mountain lion hesitated. David took a step forward, the walking stick held out to make himself look larger. His voice came again, a command that seemed to fill the entire forest. "Go." For a moment, nothing moved. The mountain lion and the human stared at each other. Then, slowly, the big cat turned. It melted back into the forest, defeated not by weapon, but by something else. Yuna stared in shock. In her world, such a threat would have been met with instant, deadly force. Weapons would have destroyed the mountain lion before it could come close. David sat back down by the fire, as if nothing had happened. "Are you okay?" he asked her. Yuna realized she was shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Amazement. This human had just done something she had never seen before. He had faced a deadly predator with nothing but his voice, his presence, his understanding of the environment. For the first time, Yuna began to wonder if her people had been wrong about humans. Very wrong. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the forest. David watched as Yuna tried to repair her damaged shuttle, her long fingers moving carefully over broken panels and twisted metal. "This doesn't make sense," Yuna muttered, more to herself than to David. He approached slowly, carrying a small toolbox from his ranger supplies. "May I take a look?" he asked. Yuna hesitated. Her advanced technology was light years beyond anything humans could understand. At least that's what she had always been told. But something about David's calm demeanor made her pause. "These circuits are completely fried," she explained, pointing to a complex network of silvery lines embedded in the shuttle's interior. "My people would typically replace the entire system." David leaned in, studying the damage. He pulled out a simple multimeter from his toolbox, a device so basic it made Yuna want to laugh. But then he did something unexpected. "See these burn marks?" he said, tracing the path of the damaged circuits. "Looks like an overload from the ion storm. The connection points are still mostly intact." Yuna stared. Her own technicians would have deemed this shuttle a total loss. But David was seeing something different. He pulled out a small roll of electrical tape, some copper wire, and a pair of wire cutters. "We might be able to create a bypass," David explained. "It won't be perfect, but it could get some basic systems running." For the next few hours, Yuna watched in fascination. David didn't have advanced tools. He didn't have replacement parts designed for her shuttle. Instead, he used what he had: creativity, problem solving, and a deep understanding of how things work. "In my world," Yuna said quietly, "we would have called for a complete replacement. Rebuild the entire system." David chuckled. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one," he replied, twisting a piece of wire with practiced hands. By midday, something extraordinary happened. The shuttle's emergency systems began to flicker. Not perfectly, not completely, but alive. "Impossible," Yuna whispered. David wiped sweat from his forehead. "Nothing's impossible," he said. "Just requires some creative thinking." Yuna studied the repairs. They were crude by her standards. Electrical tape holding together advanced circuitry. Copper wire creating bridges where complex connectors should be. But they worked. She thought about her own civilization, always reaching for the most advanced solution, always believing their technology was perfect. Yet here was a human, using nothing more than basic tools and understanding, bringing her damaged shuttle back to life. "How did you know how to do this?" she asked. David shrugged. "I fix ranger vehicles all the time, sometimes in the middle of nowhere with limited supplies." You learn to be creative. As the afternoon wore on, Yuna began to help. David showed her how to twist wire, how to create simple connections, her advanced knowledge combined with his practical skills. For the first time, she saw technology not as a perfect system, but as something that could be understood, repaired, adapted. The sun began to set. The partially repaired shuttle hummed with a weak but steady energy. David looked at Yuma, a small smile on his face. "Not bad for a day's work," he said. Yuna realized something was changing. Her understanding of humans, of technology, of possibility itself. And the night was still young. The campfire flickered between them. Night had fallen, and the forest around them was quiet except for the soft crackling of burning wood. Yuna watched David as he prepared a simple meal, something he called trail mix, and some water he had filtered from a nearby stream. "You're not scared of me," Yuna said suddenly. It wasn't a question. David looked up, a small smile on his face. "Should I be?" Yuna hesitated. In her world, an unknown encounter would be met with fear, with weapons, with careful diplomatic protocols. This human seemed different. "Most beings would be afraid of a stranger from another world," she explained. David added some wood to the fire. "I've seen a lot of strange things in these forests," he replied. "Survival isn't about fear, it's about understanding." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "I lost my father when I was young," he said. The words came out simple, but carried a weight of emotion. Yuna listened, surprised. In her culture, personal stories were rarely shared so openly. "He was a forest ranger too," David continued. "Taught me everything I know about surviving in the wilderness, about reading the forest, about being patient." A memory played in his eyes. Yuna could see it. A younger David, learning from his father, learning to survive, learning to understand the world around him. "He died saving a group of hikers," David said. "A forest fire. He made sure they got out safely, but he didn't make it." Yuna felt something she had never experienced before. Emotion, raw and real. In her world, personal loss was something to be controlled, managed. Here, David spoke of it with a kind of quiet strength. "That must have been very difficult," she said carefully. David nodded. "It was. But he taught me something important. Every challenge is a chance to learn. Every problem has a solution if you're patient enough to find it." The fire popped. Sparks flew up into the dark sky. "My people would see that as a weakness," Yuna said. "Showing emotion, talking about personal loss." David looked at her. His eyes were kind, but strong. "Emotions aren't a weakness," he said. "They're what make us human, what help us survive, what help us connect." Yuna thought about her own world. Cold, precise, always focused on the mission, always keeping personal feelings locked away. She realized she was learning something important, not just about humans, but about herself. "Tell me about your father," she said softly. And David began to talk. About a man who loved the forest, who taught his son to respect nature, who showed that true strength wasn't about power, but about caring. Yuna listened, and for the first time in her life, she began to understand something deeper than technology, something more important than her mission. The connection between beings. The fire continued to burn. Shadows danced around them. And in that moment, a princess from another world and a human park ranger shared something rare and beautiful. Understanding. The radio crackled to life just before dawn. David's hand moved quickly, adjusting the frequency. Yuna watched, her body tense. "Search and recovery team," she whispered. "My people." David didn't ask questions. He had seen enough in the past days to know this was serious. Something in Yuna's voice told him these weren't friendly visitors. A distant sound cut through the quiet forest. Something was moving. Something big. "We need to hide the shuttle," David said quietly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were alert. Yuna hesitated. In her world, hiding was not an option. Confrontation was the standard response. But something she had learned about David made her listen. They worked quickly. David knew the forest. He understood how to use natural cover. Branches, leaves, moss, things that could break up the shuttle's outline and make it harder to see. They'll use advanced scanning technology, Yuna explained. Nothing can hide from their systems. David just smiled. A small, confident smile that made Yuna wonder. The sounds grew louder. Heavy machinery. Something that didn't belong in this forest. Yuna could hear the distinct hum of anti-gravity engines. Her people were near. "Get down," David whispered. They crouched behind a fallen tree. David's ranger training kicked in. He moved without making a sound. His breathing was controlled. His body perfectly still. Yuna watched a massive ship break through the tree line. It was nothing like her small diplomatic shuttle. This was a war machine. Sleek, deadly, designed to find and eliminate threats. 3 figures emerge. They were like her, but different. Harder, colder, weapons built into their very armor. "Target location confirmed," one of them said. Their voice was flat, emotionless. David's hand moved slowly. He pulled something from his belt, a small device that looked like nothing special, but his fingers moved with purpose. Yuna realized he was blocking their scanning signals. Somehow, the search team moved closer. Their scanning beams cut through the forest like knives. Looking, searching. No biological signatures detected, one of them reported. David didn't move, not even a muscle. Yuna could feel her heart racing. In her world, discovery meant elimination. These teams didn't take prisoners. They didn't ask questions. Minutes passed. Slow, painful. Then something unexpected happened. The ship began to rise. The search team looked confused. Their advanced technology was telling them nothing. David had done something impossible. As the ship disappeared above the tree line, Yuna turned to look at him. "How?" she whispered. David just smiled. "Sometimes being invisible is better than being powerful," he said. Yuna understood something in that moment. Her people believed in overwhelming force, in technology that could crush any opposition. But David had just shown her something different. Intelligence, adaptation, understanding. The forest settled back into silence, but everything had changed. And the day was just beginning. The second search team arrived 3 days later. They were not like the first. These were hunters, trained killers. Yuna knew the signs. They would not stop. They would not negotiate. David was preparing something. She watched him carefully. In the days since the first search team, he had been working, collecting things from the forest, making plans. "They will come again," Yuna said. David nodded. "I know." The forest became their battlefield. David understood something that Yuna had never seen before. The environment was not just a place. It was a weapon. He showed her how to move silently, how to use the trees, the rocks, the natural dips in the ground, things that could hide them, things that could protect them. "My technology is nothing compared to theirs," Yuna said. David picked up a simple hunting knife. "Technology isn't everything," he replied. When the second team arrived, they were ready. The aliens moved through the forest like machines. Their armor was black, their weapons charged with energy that could destroy everything in its path. They scanned, they searched, but David had prepared. Small traps appeared, not big weapons, simple things. Tripwires made from forest vines, holes covered with leaves, branches positioned to block their path. The first alien stepped into a hidden pit. Mud and leaves swallowed him. His energy weapon discharged uselessly into the ground. Another walked into a carefully placed branch. It caught his scanning equipment, breaking it instantly. Yuna watched in amazement. These were not advanced weapons. These were simple forest tricks, things her people would never consider. The aliens became confused. Their perfect formation broke. Their advanced technology started to fail. David moved like a shadow. He understood the forest better than they understood their own weapons. He knew every tree, every rock, every small hiding place. One by one, the search team fell. Not killed, but trapped, confused, their perfect mission falling apart. Yuna realized something important. Her people believed in overwhelming force, in technology that could crush any opposition. But David was showing her something different. Intelligence, adaptation, understanding. "How are you doing this?" she asked. David smiled. "The forest teaches you," he said, "if you know how to listen." The last alien tried to call for backup. His communication device was useless. David had prepared for that too. Small changes, simple tricks. By sunset, the search team was defeated. Not by weapons, but by understanding. Yuna looked at David with new eyes. "My people will send more," she warned. David just looked at the forest around them. "Then we'll be ready," he said simply. The trees seemed to listen. The forest held its breath, waiting. And somewhere in the distance, something was coming. The night was cold. Stars looked down on the forest. David and Yuna sat by a small fire, their bodies tired but alert. Yuna knew she had a choice to make. Her mission, her people, or something else. "I could go back," she said quietly. "Report what happened." David did not look surprised. He waited, letting her think. Her people would want a full report. They would want to know about this planet, about these humans, about David. "They will want to study you," Yuna explained, "like a specimen, not like a person." David added a small piece of wood to the fire. The flames jumped higher. "And what do you want?" he asked. The question was simple, but it was the most complex thing Yuna had ever heard. She thought about her journey, about everything she had learned, about David saving her, about the forest, about human survival. Her communication device was hidden, mostly repaired. She could send a message right now. Her people would come. They would take her home. They would also likely destroy this forest, kill David, study everything. "My people believe in control," Yuna said. "We believe technology solves everything, that strength is about power." David just listened. "But you showed me something different," she continued. "Strength is about understanding, about adapting, about caring." The fire crackled. Shadows danced. "I could protect you," Yuna said. "I could become something else, a guardian, a bridge between our worlds." David's hand touched hers, a simple human gesture of connection. "What would that mean?" he asked. Yuna explained. She would modify her report. She would show her people the true nature of humans, not as a weak species, but as something extraordinary, a civilization that could survive anywhere, that could adapt, that could care. "They will not understand at first," she said. "My people are old, set in their ways." David smiled. "Change takes time," he replied. The communication device felt heavy in her pocket. One message, that was all it would take. Send the message, go home, follow her original mission, or stay, learn, protect. Yuna closed her eyes. She thought about her father, about her people's history, about everything she had been taught. And then she thought about David, about the forest, about what she had learned. Her fingers moved, but not to send a message of destruction, to send a message of hope. The device hummed to life. A message began to form, not a report of conquest, but a report of understanding. "What are you doing?" David asked. Yuna looked up. Her eyes were different now, stronger, more alive. "Changing everything," she said. The fire burned bright. The forest listened. And somewhere, far away, her people would receive a message that would change everything they knew. About humans, about survival, about possibility itself. 1 year later, the forest ranger station looked the same, but everything was different. David worked at his desk. Papers, maps, the usual ranger stuff. But something unusual sat in the corner. A small device, advanced, not from this world. Yuna's communication device, modified, connected, watching. A message came through, encrypted, complex, but David could read it now. He had learned. The message was from Yuna. She was far away, but still connected. Her people were changing. Slowly, but changing. She had become something new. A bridge between worlds. An ambassador who showed her civilization, something they had never understood before. Humans were not weak. They were not simple. They were extraordinary. David remembered the day everything changed. The crashed shuttle, the forest, the battle, the choice. His computer blinked. Another message from Yuna. They are listening now, it read. They are beginning to understand. He smiled. A small, quiet smile. The forest outside seemed to breathe. Alive. Watching. Yuna's report had been unlike anything her people had ever seen. Not a report of conquest, but a report of possibility. She had shown them humans through different eyes, not as a species to be studied, but as a civilization to be understood. Survival was not about technology. It was about adaptation, about understanding, about heart. Her people had technology that could destroy planets, but they had never understood what humans knew. How to survive, how to care, how to adapt. The ranger station was quiet, but something was different. A connection that crossed worlds. That changed everything. David looked at the small device, the link to Yuna, to her world. A sound outside. A bird called. The wind moved through trees. Life continued, but something had changed. Humans were no longer alone. And somewhere, in the vast darkness of space, another civilization was learning, watching, understanding. The world was bigger now, more complex, more beautiful. A forest ranger, a princess from another world. An impossible connection, a new beginning. The device blinked. Another message coming. They want to learn more, it read. David looked out the window. The forest seemed to smile. Possibility waited, and everything was about to change.